I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway. Welcome officially to Story Genres with Jule Kucera. These free sessions do carry sponsors. So the sponsor this month is Ingram. They're the biggest book distributor in the US, if not the world, in fact. And if you are self-published, you might be interested in some of the special promotional opportunities they offer. All you have to do is check their website, or if you subscribe to my Electric Speed newsletter, you're going to have the link in that newsletter from this sponsorship placement that you would have seen there. If you have any trouble finding this promotional opportunity, you can email me and I'll make sure that you get the information. All right, so with that out of the way, I would like to introduce you to Jule. I met Jule here in Cincinnati a couple years ago, not long after I moved back to the area after being in Charlottesville. And I think she has just wonderful instruction about story structure, story foundations. I find that she's a terrific systems person. Like, she really understands how to analyze systems. She's read all of the story structure books and has thought about them in a really deep way that I find both compelling and accessible. And she's also a gifted teacher. So I do encourage, again, everyone to go and back to the first session that we did together, because, again, it's very complementary to what she's going to present today. I'll put that link again in the chat to remind you, and in the show notes. But I'll get out of the way now. Welcome, Jule. And I won't interrupt unless there's a burning question.
Okay, that sounds like a great plan. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm like, oh, she likes my stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm just so happy to see people from all over the place here. It just, oh, I love to write, but I love for people to learn just as much. And so when somebody tells me something that I created, help them to create their story, their book, novel, memoir, whatever, it just makes me immensely happy. So welcome to Story Genres. As Jane said, I am Jule Kucera, and you are you. I am glad you are here. Sliding in fashionably late, you are just in time. There is no such thing as late for this webinar. What's genre and why does it matter? So let's get up some terminology first. And I've already noticed some things in the chat. I'm like, oh yeah, I got to mention that too. So genre simply means category as applied to a form of art. So it can be film, it can be music, books, whatever. But the problem is genre in our environment, in the area in which we work, that word gets used different ways. So writing and publishing, it's used differently. So first, let's clear that up. The way I like to describe it is story genres are not the same as bookstore genres. And bookstore genres are also called marketing genres. Bookstore genres are customer facing. They help the customer know the kind of book they're getting, or they might get if they're looking for it. What feelings, it'll tell them what feelings that story is likely to evoke in them, whether it's frightened suspense or romantic excitement. And so that's bookstore genres. The first indicator of genre to the buyer is the cover. And it's one of the reasons covers are so important. We can tell instantly looking at these two covers, even though they're both blue, one of them is a romantic comedy. And we would know that even without Emily Henry's name on it. So genres are a shorthand letting the potential reader know what kind of story to expect. I'm going to insert something I hadn't planned to say, but I noticed it in the chat. We also talk about literary, upmarket, commercial. That's another way the word genre gets used. And in that way, it's a way of describing the writing. Literary tends to be more focused on the prose, commercial tends to be more focused on the plot, and upmarket tends to be sort of in the middle there. But I want to talk about story genres, and those are writer and editor facing. They help us craft a story that will meet and hopefully exceed reader expectations. Now, every genre has conventions because we've been telling each other stories for so long that they have become reader expectations. For example, in a crime story, you will often see a speech in praise of the villain. And the whole purpose of that speech is to let us know that that villain is going to be really hard to catch. So in a crime story, for example, never mind that. I'm sorry I got distracted by the chat. I just have to like not look. I can't do that. Knowing the genres of your work in progress is tremendously helpful to you because it helps you write it. It provides, I like to think about it as guardrails. You might be wondering what kinds of things you need to include or make happen in your story, and genre gives you a lot of guidance around that, which makes it easier for you to write. For example, in a love story, we know the inciting incident is going to be the lovers meet. That's just how it works. And so, because you don't have to think about what your inciting incident is, you can spend your energy focused on how do I make that inciting incident creative, innovative, engaging? How do I make that lovers meet not just a standard meet cute, but something special? Also, knowing your genre can get you better reviews. And that sounds a little odd, but let me explain. When you know your genre, you can market your book to the readers who are looking for what your book offers. And when you are clear about what you're offering and it matches what they're looking for, then they're more likely to give it a higher rating because it meets their expectations. And let me explain from my own personal mistake how you can go wrong with this. This is my sweet baby love. When I wrote it, I knew nothing about genre. I also knew nothing about story structure, but fortunately, it a good one. I thought my memoir was a love story, which it was. Love is one of the genres, and I marketed it that way. But love isn't the primary genre. And can you imagine somebody purchasing this book because they're getting a romantic love story and the love interest dies? I can tell you that led to several 1 and 2 star reviews. People were angry. So then what happened is I learned about genres. I realized what my genre is. I changed the cover. I changed the book description. And now the book's getting the kind of readers who want to read this kind of story. So that's one moral of the story. Know your genre. It helps you write your book, and it also helps you market your book. What you'll get from this webinar, you will understand the crucial interplay between external and internal genres and use it to drive your characters and plot. And I just want to say that the way I'm talking about genres may be different from how you're used to thinking about them, and that's okay. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end so we can talk these things through because it might be similar to what you're used to or it might be different. So we'll have plenty of time to talk. You'll also use the story genres classification method to determine a story genres, and you will discover or confirm the genres at play in your work in progress. What you won't get is a detailed description of the conventions of each genre. We would be here for a long time, but you can get that in either of these books. They're both excellent. They use some different terminology from one another, but they have great detailed explanations of each genre. So genre gets us guardrails, and guardrails are useful because they keep us from driving off the road and getting stuck and, not having a story to tell. The way I look at genres is based on the Story Jules model. I saw somebody in the comment when we were logging on that they really like this model. That makes me happy. And the Story Jules model it's a story. I call it a model to architect and energize your story. You can't just architect, right? Because that can be just moving the piece around like there's on a chessboard, and we don't care about them. There needs to be that energy, that motivation from your characters. If you're not already familiar with the Story Jules model, Jane recommended watching the video on her YouTube channel, and you can also download the Story Jules handbook from this QR code here. And I have a lovely quote from Marnie, who is a screenwriter who is becoming a novelist. I'm telling you, if they plotter, she wrote to plotter, don't add you to the snowflake, hero's journey, etc. I'll abandon them before I let go of Story Jules. It's simply the most effective story analysis tool that I've come across. The way I look at story is that it is a journey of a person to change or not. It's a model built on the idea that story is fundamentally about a character choosing to change, as Katniss Everdeen does. She evolves and grows in the Hunger Games, in the whole trilogy, or not change, as in Leaving Las Vegas. So the Story Jules model is built on 2 foundational dimensions. One is the external world of order and chaos, what happens outside and around I'm going to use the word avatar for protagonist. I don't mean to be difficult with that word. The reason I like it is because protagonist sounds somewhat removed. The protagonist is over there, but avatar, that more accurately represents the relationship between the reader or viewer and that protagonist, that avatar. When we are fully engaged with a story, thanks to our mirror neurons, we enter that story world and we experience it through the avatar. So that's the word you'll hear me use. In addition to the external dimension of order and chaos, there is also the internal dimension of stasis and change. That's what happens inside the avatar, and these two dimensions work together. The purpose of the external dimension, especially the chaos part, is to put pressure on the avatar to change. And I like to think about it as pressure coming externally and then going into the avatar and saying, change, change. I like graphics a lot, you can tell, but I also like words. So here you have it in words. For an avatar to change, they must be pressured in the external dimension of order and chaos and transformed or not in the internal dimension of stasis and change. But what does this have to do with genre? Everything. Genre determines how the avatar is pressured externally and how they are pressured to change internally. So we have external genre in the words. We have internal genres, and they operate in the dimension of stasis and change. And then we have one genre that's a combination, and it does both uniquely. I find it fascinating that just as external and internal are the dimensions that underlie story, they are the dimensions that codify, at least in my codifications, genre. Story genres are determined by the values at stake. But what's a value at stake? Hold that for about 30 seconds because it makes more sense when we have examples. First, I'd like to just make sure we understand that values can be measured. There's a way of measuring them. We can have a scale, just like we'd have a scale on a thermometer. And using generic terminology, that scale ranges from positive to some compromised version of that positive to negative to double negative, or as Robert McKee calls it, the negation of the negation. Now, those are the four main markers on the thermometer, but there's all kinds of gradations between them. For example, when two people are attracted, just think about the love scale. We are minutely attuned to every infinitesimal movement up or down that scale, like in high school. He looked at me for 2 seconds, and maybe the next day it's he looked at me for 5 seconds and he smiled at me. That's infinitesimal movement on the attraction scale. So now that we know that each genre has a value scale, let's start with the external genres and look at their value scales. Again, these operate in the external dimension, and the purpose of them is to put pressure on the avatar to change. The first genre, external genre, is action, and the value scale is life to compromise life to death masked as life, or in other words, a fate worse than death. And as I talk about these genres, you might have books or movies come to mind. Feel free to put them in the chat or make notes of them. What I like about putting them in the chat is you can share, other people can see what you've got there, and you can create that as a resource. So in the action genre, I could be invigorated or weary or exhausted or wounded or in a coma. Those are different positions on that value scale. And if we think about death masked as life or fate worse than death, in this example of an action genre story, The Martian, which I love, is one of my favorite beginnings in all of novelhood or whatever. If Andy had figured out a way not to blow up the Hab and live on potatoes for the rest of his life, all alone on Mars, that probably would be a fate worse than death. All right, so we have as our first genre action. Let's go to the next. After action, we have crime. The scale here is from justice to injustice with gradations between and below. Nadine Matheson is a newer novelist. She's awarded. I heard Nadine on a pro writing aid seminar, and I was really impressed with her. If you like smart, grisly crime, she's got it with her British detective Inspector Henley. In the crime genre, the pressure comes on the avatar through their experience of injustice. And Inspector Henley and many crime series raise a question, which is, what about avatars that don't change? James Bond does not particularly change, neither does Sherlock Holmes, neither does Inspector Henley, neither does Olivia Benson, and they don't change. And the reason they don't is because they are serving a different function. They are serving the function of role model. They are showing us what it's like to be a role model in this genre. For example, my mother does not think James Bond is a role model because, as she says, he is promiscuous. So the thing to know about James Bond is whatever you think about his love life, he's a role model of justice. If I'm experiencing an injustice, I want James Bond on my side, or any one of those crime fighters. So that's why sometimes they don't change. The next external genre is horror, which ranges from salvation to compromised salvation to damnation masked as salvation. When we think of horror, we tend to think of blood and guts and chainsaws and Jack Nicholson, but I believe there's another kind of horror, and that is the horror of an unhinged human. So in Eleanor Oliphant, my perspective is that one of the genres is horror because there's the horror of what Eleanor's mother did to her, and there's also the horror of the continued damnation from Eleanor herself. She's put herself in her own kind of mental hell. In horror, the pressure on the avatar comes via their experience of evil. There are some genre people who say that horror must include an element of the supernatural. I disagree. But, to each his own. I'm just saying that this is how I see it. And, you know, take what works for you. So, what we have so far are three external genres: action, crime, and horror. And I've presented them in a very clear-cut way with an example story that's very clear-cut, but they can be mashed up. For example, thriller is a mashup of action, crime, and horror. The example is the Bosch stories. They are action stories because Bosch's life is at risk. They are crime stories because he's trying to solve one or more murders. And they are horror stories because Bosch is damned by the murders of innocents that he has not solved. And that's why he keeps those pictures under the glass on his desk that hangs over him. So this is one of the reasons thrillers are so engaging, because they are operating in three different areas of external pressure. That creates a lot of conflict and a rich plot. Now, for the last external genre, we have the one that is a mix of both external and internal, and that's love, the love genre. It does not have to be romantic love. It can be friendly or familial love, as Save the Cat says, buddy love, which to me, the Lethal Weapon series is a buddy love series. In the external dimension, in this aspect of the love genre, we're completely interested in the lovers or the love interests coming together or coming apart. Are they coming closer together? Are they moving farther apart? Will there be intimacy? Will there be estrangement? Will they come together and unite in vulnerability and courage? Or will they separate in self-armor and fear? To think about this as an external genre, again, just focus on the external aspect of the love genre coming together, moving apart. In this genre, the pressure on the avatar comes via their experience in relationships. This is a challenging genre to write because the love interest is also the antagonist. And you've got to have that three-way going because you've got to have the avatar make a choice. But on the plus side of all the genres, none sells more than love. This sells more books than any other genre. Those are our four external genres. So let's move on to the internal. These operate in the dimension of stasis and change. And again, the question that's being asked is the avatar is being asked to change. We want to see someone change from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. Or if it's a cautionary tale, how they did not change. If we take the example of Me Before You, Louisa Clark was afraid of everything. She'd never left her hometown. Yes, she'd ridden a bus, but she'd never been on a plane. And at the end, Louisa is getting on airplanes and flying to different places in the world. And we can see how Louisa has changed. And the point that I want to make here is Yes, we want our avatars to change. We hope they do, but we don't know they've changed unless we see it. So I just was reading a story summary yesterday, and in the end, the avatar, there's a note that, blah, 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 realizes, the avatar realizes, but there's no proof of that realization. So you've got to have proof. Okay, on to the internal genres. The first is validation. The genre scale, the value scale is internal validation, meaning I validate myself. I decide I'm worthy, and I decide what success means to me, what kind of life I want to live. That's internal validation. To a compromise of that, to external validation, meaning I don't think I'm worthy, so I try to earn it. I try to earn it through success, whether that's in work or sport or somehow. And then there's external validation masked as internal, which is also known as selling out. And if we use an example of an attorney, so I don't know if Nadine Matheson or John Grisham loved or hated being an attorney, but they both stopped doing that and have become authors, highly successful authors. So they are internally validating. I don't want to be an attorney. I want to be an author. At the other end of the spectrum, you can have an attorney in a high-powered, prestigious law firm who hates every minute of it, but has decided that they want this role because it makes them feel important. It gives them status. So that is an example of selling out. Yellow face is a validation genre where it's at the selling out end of the spectrum. It's about an author who steals another author's manuscript, as well as implied theft of her cultural heritage. Yeah, I did not like her. The question that the avatar wrestles with in a validation genre is, what is my value in this world? The validation genre forces the question. Me before you, we tend to think of that as a love story, and love is an operative genre in that story, but it's secondary. The primary genre in Me Before You is validation. The purpose of the love genre is to force Louisa Clark to see her value and to change, to see that she has a life worth living, that something that happened to her in her past wasn't her fault, and she still deserves a life, and she needs to get out and live it. So that's the primary genre of Me Before You. The next internal genre is worldview, and the scale here is from wisdom to knowledge to ignorance masked as wisdom. These are often called coming of age stories, and we tend to think of young adult, but you can be middle-aged, late age, you can be any age to change your view of the world. Heavy is a worldview story. It's by Kiesi Layman, and it's a fantastic memoir. It's one of my top 10 favorite books of my life. And Layman is also a fascinating speaker. He's not just a great writer, he's a great speaker. In worldview, the question the avatar wrestles with is, how do I view the world? So the validation genre is looking inward. What's my worth? The worldview genre looks outward. How do I view this world? In worldview stories, the avatar often changes from a black and white view of the world to one that's more nuanced, more shades of gray.
Jule, quick question, just to
Yeah,
make sure people understand. The
sure.
bullets that you have here, wisdom, knowledge,
Yep.
ignorance, are you suggesting this is a path or they are options?
Oh, that is a great question. I'm glad you hopped in to ask that. So it is not necessarily a path, it's a range. So what we need to see is somebody starting in one place and ending in another place, and where they might they may run the whole range. And worldview, that'd be pretty, I don't know. Anyway, they can run the whole range or they can run a piece of it. What matters is what we learn about their movement on that value scale.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for asking. Okay, that's worldview. And then redemption, the high level of redemption is altruism, then compromised altruism, then selfishness masked as altruism. Killers of the Flower Moon is a redemption genre, and cautionary tales, ones where we learn what not to do, are often redemption stories. Killers of the Flower Moon is an example of selfishness masked as altruism, hidden in the guise of love. It is such a sad story. It's interesting to me that when we finish a cautionary tale, it often doesn't feel good. Even if it's well written, well plotted, well acted, the failed morality of it is disheartening. In a redemption story, the question the avatar wrestles with is, what is my responsibility to others? And this is the question that's at the heart of individualism versus collectivism. Individualism is what's good for me filters out to others. Collectivism is what's good for the whole filters into me. This has been I'm going to make an editorial comment. This has been an ongoing struggle for the United States, where we want to be on this individualism versus collectivism spectrum. And Goethe Hofstede is a researcher, he's passed away, but according to his measurement model, there is no country that is more individualistic, or said another way, least collectivist, than the United States. So I'm really curious to see if we're going to see more redemption stories as the US wrestles with this, what's my commitment? And yes, validation and status are two words for the same genre. And the other one that is a story grid term is redemption is morality in the story grid terminology. In both cases, I chose to use a label that another story genre author uses because I thought it was more reflective of what that genre is all about. In love, now we're looking at the internal dimension of the love story. So the external was, are they coming closer together, farther apart? In the internal, it's, will I sacrifice for this love? Will I sacrifice for this love? So for Pride and Prejudice, will Jane surrender her prejudice? Will Mr. Darcy surrender his pride? In another story, will she cut off her hair to buy a chain for his watch? Will he sell his watch to buy a comb for her hair? So that's the question on the love genre, the scale from love to compromise love to hate masters love. Very rare to go all the way up and down the scale in a love genre story. If you're asking yourself, but what about somebody who all they do is sacrifice to the point of they're almost not even in the relationship, they're just sacrificing and serving. That could be either a compromised love or even less than that, because they're not really in a relationship because it's not really them. They're just being whatever this other person wants them to be. So those are the 4 questions of the internal genres. What's my value in this world? How do I view the world? What is my responsibility to others? Will I sacrifice for this love? And therefore, how shall I live? And that is the question prompted by the internal genre. We are looking for ways to explore different books, movies, give us a way to explore different ways to live, different ways to be, and we use them to inform who we want to be in this world, either by a positive example or a prescriptive, a cautionary tale. So now we have what I at one time thought were the genres. And the reason I got into genre, just to explain, is because I was teaching a memoir class and I realized I had no intention of going into genre because, as you know, it's deep. There's a lot there. But I realized they needed to know the genres of the stories they were telling, or they were just getting lost. So what happened was there were 3 people in the class who were telling a story that this model did not sufficiently capture their genre. And it really tormented me for a while. But I came to a conclusion, and I'm curious to see what you think about it. But let me tell you one of the stories because that explains what happened. One of the people in the class was telling the story about how she was 9 years old. There was a political revolution in her country, and her parents' lives were in danger. She was put on an airplane, a 727, a big airplane, full of other kids her age, and flown out of that country to come to the United States. And they were told, don't worry, kids, your parents will be on the next flight. But she was not reunited with her parents until she was 16. And there were several flights like this. They were called the Peter Pan children. But as she was telling her, talking to us about her story, I was realizing that her external genre, so what are the choices we have here? Action, crime, horror. It's a crime story because of she is experiencing an injustice. She's being pulled from her parents, sent to another country just because of this political upheaval. And you could say it's action because her life is in danger. I don't know that hers was. I know that her parents was. But the action danger is prompted by the injustice. So if the external genre is pressure on a single individual, maybe we can also look at what about when the pressure hits an entire community, not a random group of people, but an identifiable group, a group that has something in common, whether that's a country, a belief, a circumstance, an identity, something that that group experiences pressure because they are a member of that group. So we're going to go through each of the external genres and apply it to a group. So action, not a group, community, because they have to have something in common. Action applied to a community is war, such as in All Quiet on the Western Front. Crime applied to a community is society, such as The Hate You Give. Horror applied to a community is, I'm using the word religion because I don't have a better one, and I'm open to other suggestions. But I don't mean a personal belief system. What I mean is an organized means to control a population. The example here is the Da Vinci Code. And then love applied to community is universal love, the life of Mahatma Gandhi. So now we have both individual and community genres for each of the four external genres. We don't need community genres for the internal because internal happens within a single individual. I'd like to point out that the scale on those external genres does not change, whether it's an individual or a community. The scale stays the same. If you have an individual genre, you don't have to have a community genre. But if you have a community genre, you must have the associated individual genre. Let me explain. For example, I guess I must like the Hunger Games these days. The Hunger Games is an example of crime and society. It's a society genre because there is injustice in that society, because any society that kills its teenagers for sport is not just. There's a problem there. But if we just read about it, oh, this is a society that has this big competition and teenagers kill each other. Okay, we feel that in one way, but we have to take it to the crime and to in how the individual is impacted, because we have to see it through Katniss Everdeen's eyes. We have to see what happens when her younger sister Prem is reaped before is she gets reaped in the reaping. And then we have to see what happens when Rue dies. We have to see how it affects her relationships with her other players. So that's why you can have, so action isn't always war, but war is always action. Crime isn't always society, but society is always crime. Horror isn't always religion, but religion is always horror. You always have to have both when you have the community. Okay. All right. Now, this chart has additional information for each of the genres. It has what's the avatar's challenge? What are they being asked to do? And then what are the feelings that it will evoke in the reader or the viewer? This chart is one of the tools or charts that's in the story genres quick guide, which you are welcome to get through this QR code. Those are two nice quotes. And I want to add that I've presented this in a very neat way, like clear-cut genres, but it isn't always that neat and clean. Sometimes it's messy, but as long as the author knows what they're doing, it will work. It can work, it will work. Where the Crawdads Sing is an example of a genre mashup. And the New York Times Book Review said, painfully beautiful, at once a murder mystery, so that's crime in our language, a coming of age narrative, so that's worldview in our language, and a celebration of nature. Maybe that's love, or maybe that's just a reflection of the setting. But anyway, so I thought what we would do is we move into the what's my genre section, but I want to check in with Jane to see if there's anything pressing, because I don't want something that's pressing to be in the way.
I wouldn't say there's anything pressing, but we do have some rich questions for later.
Oh, goody. Okay. All right. So, yeah. And when I see myself do that, I think, oh, Jule, you should be more mature. And then I'm like, no, just be yourself. Okay. So what's my genre? There was a worksheet provided if you wanted to use that, or if you have it. And if you don't worry about it. Just took notes. But the key to figuring out your genres is looking for the pressure. You want to look for the pressure that gets applied to the avatar, both externally and internally, how they're being asked to change. and the pressure gets measured on the value scales. So I'm going to talk through the questions that will help you answer the question, what's my genre? And you can use them with either your work in progress as the the test case, or a book you know well, a story you know well. It could be a movie. I'm going to use Tana French's The Hunter. I finished this not long ago. I was visiting my mom and I pulled it off the shelf on the spine of her library. She has an excellent library where she lives, and it says mystery on the spine. So we're going to find out, is it a mystery? Is it a crime? We will find out. So we'll start with the external genres. The first question is, where is the external pressure applied to the avatar? Is it their body, their experience of injustice, their experience of evil, their relationships? Wherever it's coming in, that tells you whether it's action in their body, crime, injustice, horror, evil, love, relationships. For the hunter, there's a couple of things happening here. One is it's on the mystery shelf, so that's crime. There is a murder, and there's actually two at least. So there's one of the genres at play is crime. And then there's also love is at play because Trey is the main character. So she's experiencing pressure because from the murder that happened before the book started and from these relationships that she forms with Cal and Lena. So those two genres are at play at the Hunter. Then we need to ask about the community genres. Is the avatar part of a community that is experiencing the same external pressure? Again, those same four areas. So if it's their body, it's war. If it's their experience of injustice, society, experience of evil, religion, in quotes, their relationships, universal love. For the hunter, it has a society genre because the reason she is Trey and her family are experiencing injustice is because they're at the bottom of the status scale. They are the impoverished, not even going to use that terminology. That's something I grew up with. Anyway, they're out there where, the lesser people live in the woods. And Trey is actually almost a feral teenager when the book starts. So the injustice, the societal injustice of this story is it is a community that would let her brother be killed and nothing happens. And Trey is out to bring justice, to avenge that. So after the external, we go to the internal genre. The question is, how is the avatar being pressured to change? Is it their view of themselves, their self-worth, their view of the world, their responsibility to others, their sacrifice for love? We can see that it's validation or worldview or redemption or love or some combination. In the hunter, it's Trey's view of the world and love. Will she sacrifice for love? Trey is 15, which means she's like the right age for a coming of age story or worldview story. But what's pressuring her internally is this Cal and Lena and the love that they are showing her that she has never experienced before in her life. What she wants is revenge. That's her whole plan for the book starts. World is unjust. My brother got killed. I'm getting my revenge. But then the question becomes, what do you do when your desire for revenge and your care for love conflict? What do you do then? So the hunter, even though it's on the thriller or whatever mystery shelf, its primary genre is worldview because it's all about how Trey changes her view of the world. But it also includes the other genres that I checked as we went along. So that is how we can figure out our genres. And that seems like a good time to start answering questions. So I can stop sharing. Yes?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I have to start with the question that basically just ties into your last sentence there.
Okay.
What if after watching this whole thing and everything is said and done, you still can't classify your
Yeah.
genre?
Yeah. So that can happen, and it does happen. So what I would say is then pick. You're going to need a primary internal, you're going to need a primary external because that will help you write it. If you just say I have them all, you're going to find yourself with a very muddled work.
Mm.
And I have a kind of a sneaky suggestion for the internal genre, which is if you really can't decide on the internal, pick the one that's an issue in your own life
Mm.
because it will show up in your writing anyway. So that will help you write it because you know that one really well.
Oh, what a great tip. I
Oh,
love
good.
that.
Oh, good.
Okay. There was a question early on about Robert McKee
Yeah.
and his book Story. Now, for those who don't know this book, it's like a doorstop. It is, and he is hugely influential in screenwriting. That has trickled over into the literary world as well. There are a lot of novelists who have read that book or went to his workshops. And I think there's still significant influence
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
generally speaking, in storytelling from his book and his workshops.
Yeah.
So, someone who's attending actually went to one of these sessions in the 1990s, still has the signed copy of Story.
Yeah.
Um, she's wondering, how is his approach regarded today? I mean, I don't know that I've actually heard any discussion of this lately. I've always felt like it's still considered foundational.
Yeah.
What do you think? Especially since I feel like you're closer to this than I am because you've been looking at all of these different systems recently.
I would love to sit down with Robert McKee and ask him that question. And I think that question, but the question is, what happened to genres
Mm.
with you? Because he was working on a book about genre specifically, and it never came out.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like he
Okay.
talks about genre and story, and I'm sure he does. I've never been to his workshop, but the book that he was, if it got written, I can't find it. So I'm very curious about that. But he's so highly regarded, and I think his gift to novelists, memoirists, is that he makes the point that you can't, you got to have you can't just write words, right? So he understands, because we like to write words, but there has to be, plot and conflict. And I especially appreciate about him is his multidimensional, his richness of the way he describes character now, of
Mm-hmm.
all the, his James Gandolfini and how he's like kills people and rescues ducks out of swimming pools, these complexities of character. So
Yeah.
I wish I could say more. I have questions too. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I'll have to go looking now for he's still alive, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, still I don't know how active he is,
I
but
I don't think he's as active as he used to be, but I don't know.
okay. All right. There was a question about validation, which you may have in fact already answered. Is validation similar to status genre in the story grid methodology?
Why, yes, it is. Status, I call it validation. Sean Coyne calls it status.
Okay.
And also the other one is he uses the term morality and I use redemption. And I'm just looking at this slide. If there's any other, I can't, it's too small. I can't see. Um, anyway, yes, that's the same thing.
Great. Uh, what do you hold on. I'm trying to think about how to I think you'll know where this is coming from. I certainly do.
Okay. Okay.
How much of the essentialness of the change narrative is Western culture?
Such a great question. It's huge in Western culture and not in Eastern culture, right? So it depends on what kind of story you want to tell. So don't worry about this arc if you don't want to. It's just, and it's that the person who asked that question knows the difference, right? So they know what
Yeah.
kind of story they want to tell. And what I would say is, if this isn't what you want to tell, you don't have to. I think it's harder to tell a story without a transformational arc, but Emily St. John Mandel can do it.
So are you talking about Station 11 or
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Okay.
yeah.
There's also, is it Matthew Sales's? Is it his book that talks about the different structures? Sometimes I conflate
I
that
don't know.
guide with another one. I'll look it up
Okay.
and try to get it in the chat here. Um, have you read Tara Westover's Educated?
Yes.
Okay, so someone is wondering, would that be a character-driven worldview genre, going from ignorant masked as wisdom to wisdom?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I want to start. It's definitely internal genre. Yes, worldview. I think worldview is primary. I think validation is also part of it underneath because and that's often, those two are often kind of linked because in order to think of how I view the world, you also have to think about how do I view myself. I mean, the family she grew up in, and being having her father like throw stuff, like potentially wound her with car parts and stuff. It's like it's just a horrible, horrible thing. And I would think that that could lead to some doubt about herself. And she did doubt herself when she went over to Europe and stuff. But yeah, it's primarily worldview. External, wow, it might be, wow. I got to think about that because there's no, there's action elements because her body's in danger at times. There's crime of this and crime society, this injustice, but I really put it more with the religion. I honestly put it more with the religion because that's the vehicle her father, mother maybe, but her family is using to dominate the family. Religion on a small scale, not a country, but a family.
So when people start drafting, um, do you feel like they should know that their genre going in and write toward it rather than writing in the book and then deciding after the fact what genre it's in?
I'm going to use the answer that I used to get in grad school all the time. It depends.
It
So it
depends.
really, it depends on the author. It depends
Yeah.
on how the author likes to write. And some people are more intuitive or discovery writers and they start writing and then it reveals itself to them. I'm frankly more of a plancer. I'm hands more on the planning, but I like to plan a little, write a little, plan a little, write a little. That's how I
Yeah.
do it. But I think for sure, by the time you have your first draft done, then you got to know your genres because that will help you do your editing.
Yeah. Agreed. Judy wonders, would it be fair to say that longer form stories might touch on all of the internal genres, even if they focus primarily on one?
Sure. I mean, I'm thinking about where the crawdads sing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone wonders if Gothic is a validation tale, and I'm not sure if that's a reference to a specific book or to the Gothic novel.
Yeah. If it's a book, I have not read it. But what I would say about Gothic novels in general, and the same is true for, let's talk about that kind of genre.
Yeah.
Gothic, um, sci-fi, fantasy, Western. I believe those are conditions that are that support a particular genre. Like I see sci-fi and Western as primarily in the external society genres because the question they ask is how can a community have a just society when the legal system is either non-existent or just fledgling. It's like how do we live in a just way when there's like no rules, it's all loosey-goosey here. So that's why Truby and Coin both have Western as a genre, and I don't, because I don't think it's about whether it's in the Western or whether it's in the space. I think about what it's asking that society.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question from Anna, who writes fantasy. She says, I'm not used to thinking of genres in this way. So, what do you think are the external and internal genres of some of the popular fantasy franchises? And she mentions a few. I'm going to start with one I know that you've used as an example, Star
Okay.
Wars.
Star Wars. It's so old, I hardly even think about it. I almost think about it as reality, not fantasy or sci-fi anymore. So Star Wars is primarily an action story, and in the internal is mm, validation. He's got to stop seeing, he moves from stopping seeing himself. It's his view of himself as this like helpless farm boy. I got to stay home and help my uncle to I'm the hero who decides to turn off the computer and take my own shot. That's how I see Star Wars. I thought you were going to say like Fourth Wing or something. Oh my gosh. So I did read Fourth Wing. Um, Actually though, that's one that has a lot. I got to go back and think about that one. Yeah, but can I
Well,
just,
oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. No.
Oh, I was just going to offer another fantasy series that I imagine you know really well.
Okay.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, I don't know. I'm embarrassed. I've watched the movies, but I've never read it.
Oh, but the movies are enough if you think you can
Okay.
do it based on the
I
movies.
think I can do it based on the movies. Okay, so we always go action for sure. Then is it crime? I don't really think so. But the whole thing about the ring, you tell me. I want people in the chat to say, what's the deal with the ring? You tell me.
That's
There are
good.
people
Yes,
there.
let's crowdsource that.
Let's crowdsource that because there are people who know that story better than I do, for sure.
And then one more, if you
Yeah.
know it,
Yeah.
Wicked.
Wicked. It's been a long time. I saw the play years ago. Sorry, Face is the last thing my husband and I did together. Um, Wicked.
We can also ask people in the chat for their opinion on that.
Yeah, I'm not in a good space to answer that right now. Sorry.
I haven't seen that maybe like when it first came to theaters, like the musical.
Yeah,
That's been a long time ago. So
yeah. I'm gonna go see the movie for my birthday, so that's soon.
okay.
Religion censor up. Ooh, go Judith. So you're talking about the evil. Religion censor up against the evil boils down to the ring. I tried reading Wicked Fail. Good follow up to Barbie. hmm
Okay.
Can you have worldview, universal love, and redemption together? Sure, that's hard. The universal love is what makes it hard, but maybe that gets demonstrated through via the redemption. As long as they tie together, that could work.
I want to make sure we answer this question, especially for people who joined late and didn't get your initial
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
definition of genre, how that's being used in this class. So, Sandy
Yeah.
is wondering how your description of genre fits with the publishing world's use of the word genre. And would a writer incorporate mentions of validation or worldview in a query?
I would probably not use it in a query. I would use it in any working with an editor.
Mhm.
But in a query, I would be talking about whether it's upmarket or literary or
Yeah,
commercial. That's because in a query, they're looking to sell books. An editor is looking to help you tell a good story. And that's what, so the way I'm using genre there um, is to help you tell the story, not to help you sell the story in a
right.
way. Um, but I want to thank Christina because I think what she wrote about the Ring trilogy makes sense. It's good versus evil and redemption, willing to sacrifice self to save the world.
I read a really interesting analysis of Lord of the Ring recently. I'm not going to remember where, that makes the argument that Sam is the real hero of that story.
I I heard somebody else. They must have read the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah. Huh.
because he is essentially it's an act of service, of sacrifice. It's
hmm
a friendship. It's really prioritizing the friendship
Yeah.
or service piece of that story.
Yeah.
Because without Sam, Frodo wouldn't obviously have succeeded.
Yeah. You've got agreeers over there in the chat.
Oh, Tolkien says Sam is the hero. Oh, I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Ta-da. Well, there we go. Oh.
Okay. Melanie wonders with a dual timeline novel where you have two different protagonists. In fact, I think if you have a novel with multiple protagonists, it wouldn't even
Yep.
have to be dual timeline.
Right.
Would each one have different internal genres?
They could. It depends on the story you're trying to tell, of course. And um, it's usually easier to tell a story where they have the same internal genre, where they're both, because then we really get to see how two different people wrestle with that question. Um, and I'm thinking about Gone Girl, you know, both of them are kind of working the same question, which is, what do I owe you? Do I love
Yeah,
you? Who are you?
right, right.
Yeah. So if one of them's off trying to solve a crime and the other one's, will I sacrifice for love? It might not work so well.
Right.
Oh no, crime's external. Let me go internal. One of them's worldview. Yeah, you could have two different internal genres as long as the external genre, it just helps to pull them together somehow.
So I'm going to end with one of my own questions, or
Okay.
I don't know, it's less a question and more of a musing because this came up during a class earlier this week, and I actually posed this um, scenario to people on social media because I was kind of baffled.
Hmm.
And I got so many responses. For those people who want to see the range of responses I received, I will put the link into the chat.
Oh, cool.
Um, but the writer told me there has been pushback from romance readers in recent years. And I think something similar is happening in fantasy, FYI, who say the real world is too stressful and that they don't want tension and suspense. They often refer to tension and suspense as conflict. They don't want that in their reads. Instead, they want vibes. And so the writer was wondering how, huh? How do I deal with this? So I know this is a little bit of a tangent to what you're presenting, but certainly I just wonder if you have thoughts about what is happening there and how that might tie into your story genres discussion.
Yeah, I'm thinking about mystery and cozy mystery, right? So
Yes, yes.
when I'm kind of seeing it that way, where there still needs to be some conflict, but I need it in a way that I know it's all going to work out and we're going to have cookies and tea at the end. Uh,
Right, yeah. Um, I'm putting the link in the chat because there were so many responses and theories. Um, there were some people who were theorizing that in romance in particular, people have grown frustrated with the third act breakup.
oh,
That it's too manufactured, it feels false, and it's creating a lot of stress and anxiety that seems totally unnecessary.
yeah.
But some of the other answers I found really interesting that maybe point to changing desires in readers, especially younger readers. But this is something I feel like it will require further research. But certainly
Yeah.
the cozy fantasy is something of it's like a newish subgenre. Like I never saw cozy fantasy prior to the pandemic, but
Mhm.
like Legends and Lattes would be a really good
Oh,
example of that.
oh.
So I feel like there's something to this vibes thing, but I don't necessarily think that means no conflict.
Yeah. No, I think no conflict would be hard to keep going unless it was a really short story. But I do have a comment about the third act breakup, and it's just so predictable. Eh, Often when we feel that way, the writer hasn't done their job because it should not feel predictable. It should feel inevitable and also surprising in how it happens. And that's really hard to do. So, which is why we have to go deep into the character to make it happen and not just be some blah, blah, blah.
Right,
I got to go to Chicago, so bye.
right.
I'm breaking up with you.
Um, One of the shows I've been watching recently, Somebody Somewhere. This is a HBO show. It just wrapped up its third season. It's a 30-minute, I would call it a comedy. Um, but to me, it seems like a show that's maybe more about vibes. Like there are definitely character arcs, there are
Mm-hmm.
problems that present themselves. There are both external and internal
Yeah.
problems. But it's not a stressful show to watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there
Well,
is something really nice about that.
it's reminding me of Seinfeld back in the day. That was not a stressful show to watch. Um, and mainly I was watching the characters, or even with friends in some ways.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anna has an interesting comment here about Rainbow Rowell. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Who handles difficult conflict in a gentle way. I don't feel triggered when I read her books.
that's cool.
So some of it may be that authors are trying to shock their readers, which yeah, that can get tiresome. I admit.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if I feel like they're using me. They're not respecting me as a reader.
Right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I think we have gotten through all of the questions. I am going to repost the link to the little story genre kit just to make sure that everyone saw it, especially if you missed the QR code. So here it is again. And I
Thank you.
assume that link will be indefinitely
It's
working.
indefinite. Until somebody sends me an email and says, "Hey, your link's not working." I'm like, "What?" Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you all for spending a
Yeah.
bit of a pre-holiday weekend with us. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Jewel, I always I always love hearing you talk about story.
Okay.
It's not stressful to hear you
Oh, good.
talk about story.
It's a little bit for me. Oh, thank you, Jane. Thank you, everybody on the thank yous. It's nice.
I
So,
hope to see what this is my last official class of the year. So
ooh,
I look forward to seeing you all next year, I hope, in another session.
cool.
All right. Have a great holiday, everyone, and Happy New Year. Bye bye.